Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we've got an amazing guest on, Chuck Swindoll Jr. So his series on the God Eaters, the Khazarian Mafia, and who really runs the world blew my mind. So it's a 5-part series. I think there's only 2 of them allowed on YouTube, but the rest are on Rumble and Odysee and other platforms, guys. But Chuck,
Yeah.
welcome to the channel. That was such an amazing 5-part series, and we're going to be diving into who
Thank you.
really runs the world and the history behind it all and how we got here today. So yeah, great stuff.
Mm. Thank you very much, Alex. I'm honored to be here. Happy to be a part, man. Absolutely.
So for those people that haven't followed you at all, do you want to give them maybe a bit of your journey and your awakening to what's really going on all
Mm.
around us?
Yeah, quite a story, long history. I was deeply embedded in religion for 40 years, and part of my whole awakening from religion involved also discovering who really runs the world. It was very organic for me. My awakening was very organic. It was a long process, probably started. Let's see, I'm 55 now. About when I was 40 years old, 45, right around in there, is I was late waking up to all this stuff. But I just, when the biggest awakening for me was when I contracted cancer and realizing that the entire medical industry is a fraud. And that really was the beginning sequence. And when I went down that rabbit hole, it eventually led to the KM, because if you dig into these things, you get further and further into the truth of our reality, which is nothing like what we see. And so it was a very long process, and it really took cancer and the failure of medicine to really shake me enough to realize you're going to have to wait to a deeper perspective here before you're going to heal yourself of cancer and heal yourself of religion. And so that's really where it all started for me. That would have been, like I said, when I was in my early 40s. And I've been on that journey for about 15 years now. And the God Eater series was just an organic outpouring of my experience with the dissolution of the medical industry. And when I came upon this article by Mike Harris, I believe, and it was on the Khazarian Mafia, and I read his document with my mouth on the floor, like, oh my goodness, this really summarizes so well a lot of the things I've been discovering that have been causing me to ask questions, basic questions of who really runs the world. And Mike's article on the Khazarian Mafia was the kickoff, and I spent a number of months researching and referencing names and groups and people and institutions that he referenced in the document. And it just becomes a maze, an unbelievable cacophony of information. And it really boiled all down to, really, at the end of the day, it boils down to the Khazarian Mafia. And they really are the ones who have taken hold of the entire planet and turned the planet into a human farm. And so it's been quite a journey, but I've appreciated that it's been organic and that it's taken a while. It didn't come as a shock, but it was rather just an unfolding. And so I didn't go too crazy when I found all this stuff out. So,
Well, yeah, interesting that your journey started with health, and I completely agree. As an ex-pharmacist that's now trying to educate people about all this type of stuff, and we're going to do a follow-up episode completely about health and detoxing and all that. But today we're going to focus on who runs the world, and maybe before we dive deep into who the Khazarian Mafia are and how they got into power, let's maybe start for who runs the world now and the more familiar terms that people have heard and how they've kind of the 3 pillars of maybe banking, military, and religion. Do you want to maybe start there for people that maybe aren't real deep down the rabbit hole?
yeah. Okay. So the way the world operates is underneath basically banking institutions and the globalists that sometimes we see in the news. And these individuals, their power goes back a long, long way. They didn't just come into power recently. This goes back hundreds, even thousands of years, their history. And they remained secretive for a very long time, which allowed them to basically capture the leading institutions, the institutions that were driving the culture. So Babylonia, Egypt, Judaism, all of these major cultural individuals and groups that are the foundational undergirding of all the organized systems that run the world. And so these globalists, these internationalists that are worth, so much money, become not only very knowledgeable in what they're doing, but they are extremely wealthy. So they surround themselves with protection and lies, which keeps people from being able to identify that they are actually the ones that are running the world, but they're the puppet masters. They're the people that are behind the government officials that we see every day, the governors and the mayors and the people that are in the trenches with all of us running the society. This globalist group is like a hidden shadow that are behind those individuals that are right up front in the camera that you see so often every day in the news. And in fact, this group, these globalists, own the news networks. And so the news that the news networks covers is actually controlled and narrated by this shadow institution that at the same time is running the governmental institutions and the governors and senators and so forth that are making the laws and putting into place all of the law and structure that forms the society. They are the lobbyists that are putting money into those gentlemen so that they will carry out their own the controlling factors agenda, because these globalists are organized. And maybe some of you possibly have heard of a group called the Illuminati. Maybe that's become more popular over the last decade or so. And this is really that group's front. But who is actually a member of the Illuminati? Who actually composes this group? And that's when it gets more difficult to, because they work very hard to be hidden. They don't want to be known. They don't want to be rock stars. They don't want to be on the camera. They want to be completely unknown, because that's the best way they can stay hidden. So you never realize it's their agenda that the governors, mayors, lawyers, and so forth that are carrying out in front of us and making our laws every day. So that's a little bit of a picture of how they're in control, what they control, why they're in control, and so on and so forth. And that's kind of at the bottom of these layers as you begin to dig.
Yeah, and I get, so people at home, the way I like to try and get people to think about this is, if you actually study history, as you said, you can go back hundreds or even thousands of years, humanity has never really been free. There's always been a ruling class, and there's always been some element of mind control, or as you did that video about egregores and belief systems, and this is what is real, and this is what to believe, and the idea of free thought. And then we can get into also how, toxins in the environment, and people are just so distracted, and dopamine addictions now. People have actually almost lost that ability to critically think and problem solve, and their time poor. There's all these reasons why people can't figure out what's going on, but they feel that something isn't right.
Yeah, and what's really interesting in that these medicines they use so dilute people. They put you in an altered state where you can't critically think, and they basically suck out this human life energy that you have in exchange for numbing an individual so they just don't feel anything. And that's really a lot of where medicine has gone, is in that way. And the interesting thing is there's reason for that. There's a reason medicine has gone petrochemical, and it hasn't been for people's betterment. It's been to control them, to dumb them down, to slow them down in their thinking and self-identity, so they just kind of remain in this wash of a weird illusion of reality. And there's purpose and thought behind it. There's a reason why China fell to the opium wars in the 19th century. There's real reason behind that. That's not organic. It's not natural. This is imposition. It's an imposed war by this shadow group behind the scenes, who at that time is using medicine to control the society. And now the society is controlled with bankings and the whole fiat system. It's tenacious. These people are intertangled and intertwined with everything. Nothing escapes them or has escaped them. So all that we know has been tainted by them. And that's a hard pill for people to swallow, because we really look up to these institutions for guidance, for knowing what is going on in the world, and so on and so forth. And so it takes some bravery and courage to try and see past that narrative that they hand people and see the truth of the situation. So yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that.
So let's dive a little bit more deeply into what you found about banking and debt-based money as a one form to really enslave people. And our audience, we've been covering a lot of this stuff about the Fed and explaining how money works for years and years now. So people will be pretty familiar with the more modern side of things. But do you want to go, you can maybe touch on that briefly if you like, but let's go deeper back in history to where this really all started.
Okay, well, if we go back far enough, we go to maybe Sumer, the ziggurats, the pyramids of Egypt. What is happening is there's a priest class that is developing knowledge and power to then control the society. Now, it's of my opinion that I think a lot of that development initially was organic and was a good thing. They were looking to the stars for understanding. They were noticing that there were parallels between the microcosm and the macrocosm, and that we are a reflection of that, and looking to the stars for guidance. And it was this priest class, which came out of shamanism, if you go back far enough, that really began to control the society, but originally in a good way. It was originally to figure out when to sow the seeds, what was the proper time of year to do that, when was the proper time to harvest, when was the proper time to procreate, and all of these things were decided and controlled by this priest class, which most people don't realize also were the ones that anointed the king. And so you start to begin to see this incredible power, but it's not really up front. It's this undergirding power, and it's anointing the king. It's telling the society how to behave, but it's carrying these functions out through this priest class, this upper elite echelon class that naturally begins to develop as societies begin to develop, because those societies are needing some kind of leadership to guide thousands, tens of thousands, and even Babylon was in the hundreds of thousands of people. So these are very large groups of people. And so the controlling function really came out of the priest class and their knowledge of the heavens and being able to tell people how to behave appropriately on earth so that the society can survive, so that you have the grain over the winter, so that you are breeding at the right time, so that you have the best chance for the next generation of people to survive. And there's a real logic and order and rhythm to all of that, and it was the priest class that was over that. Well, eventually, that priest class became corrupted for what I think are around two reasons. The first one being they're realizing that they did have great power, that they really did carry the society in their hand. And there's a natural tendency in a lot of people to really relish that power and to want that power. And they love to control people and tell people what to do. And so there's a culling situation that begins to happen where you get more and more of these controlling type people begin to take over into this priest class, and it begins to corrupt. And then on top of that, you have the KM, who are, well, this is way, way back, but they are around 800 AD and a little bit before that. They're developing in Khazaria, and they are intertwined with the trade routes that come out of China, the Silk Road and so forth that opened in 0 BC. They were located physically on the planet in an area that was perpendicular or coincided with these trade routes. And these groups of people knew that there would be very wealthy merchants that would be carrying all of these silks, garments, and all of these products that they'd been making in the Far East, and they're bringing it into the developing West. And so they realized this Khazarian group in Khazaria realized that they can pilfer these groups. And what was really crazy about what happened was they began to bring these families that are traveling over the vast amounts of land. They began to capture these families, and then they would bring them in as friends. And this family group would walk in, and you would have these groups in Khazaria that are telling them, hey, we like you, we care about you, we want to help you, and maybe we can share some knowledge with each other, and so on and so forth. It was a very interesting way that they began to capture them. And they would bring these families in, and they would find out about their heritage. They'd find out about their trades. They would find out the people they were going to meet in the West. They would find out how and where and all the details of this traveling family. And then they would, I'm sorry to say this, but they would then murder this family, take all of their money, all this clothing, and then they would pose themselves as that family and go into the West pretending that they were this family that they killed. And they would meet, because they would know the letters that were written in exchange. They would know the names of the people they were going to meet. They would know the locations they were going to meet them, because there was a exchanging of information through these trade routes. And so they would go in and begin to form a relationship with these trading groups in the West, and they built an empire, pilfering these families that are coming through, and then using their contacts in the West to build their power in the West. And over hundreds and hundreds of years, they established relationships with the aristocracy. They established relationships with the governing authorities through the power that they were gaining through the pilfering of these materials and families that are passing through the silk trade. And this goes on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and Khazaria builds an empire off of the marauding of these families and their money and their trade. It's an incredible story. And so they have then, at that point, by about 1000 AD, 1200 AD, they've moved into the West, into Europe, and they're involved in the families that are running the societies at that time. And Freemasonry began to be developed, this whole secret society that would carry this knowledge that this group had accumulated over hundreds and thousands of years, pilfering this area of Khazaria. And so they took over at that point these aristocracies and these royal families that are running everything through blackmail. And they would, in a very similar way to what's happening now in society, they would blackmail these families to control the aristocracy, and then they began to breed into the royalty. And so you have this group of people that have nothing to do with the West, and they are now, through breeding, putting in their agents, putting in their own children into the realms of power of aristocracy that are basically building Rome, that are building the world, that are culture, that culture is beginning to form into society. And they're controlling it from this group. And so all through the Middle Ages, the plague, all that happened, that went on, the Crusades, and all of this that was going on in Europe at that time, they began to take over through religion, because the Vatican was a corrupted society that had been corrupted by the agents of Khazaria back in 325. And so this is what built the world. This is what built religion. All of society, religion, all of these groups that control the building of a society are controlled by this malicious group that has taken over with their own agenda, and their agenda is not for the betterment of the society, but to control the society and keep themselves in power. And that, honestly, Alex, has continued to this day. The whole building of the governments that we see, I mean, there hasn't been an organic war since Napoleon. They've controlled every single war, and they have used war to gain control over the society by operating both sides of the war. And so they are you see the left and right wing in America. Well, it's the same bird. You have two different wings, and they're posing as quote unquote enemies or against each other, but they're actually controlled by the same group, this Khazarian Mafia. And it has continued from the Middle Ages, their control and power, 1250, all the way now into modern society. And so it's really organized. It's not happenstance. There's a history to it, and you can follow it. And that's some of the stuff that I talk about in the God Eaters.
Yeah, amazing. And maybe let's dive into some of the religion stuff next then as a good segue. But I think it's important for people to understand maybe the difference between spirituality, because I think part of the Great Awakening is people maybe realizing that, hey, consciousness and nature and all these things we haven't given much thought about all ties into spirituality, rather than some of maybe the new age spiritual stuff, which twists the term, or traditional religion. Because when you hear words like God, people automatically have certain assumptions. Versus, just trying to talk about, well, what makes us conscious and the creator and brings nature to life. So do you want to maybe define how you differentiate between spirituality and religion, and then dive into the history of how religions have been sort of corrupted?
How I define spirituality and religion. Okay, so I see religion more as a controlling agency, and spirituality more as the awakening of the individual, realizing that there is a profundity and wonderment that undergirds all things. Religion's role has been to come in and usurp that idea and to say that it is the authority. It is the translator. When the Pope was elected, he became, quote unquote, the actual voice of God. And what you do at that point is then everyone then listens to the Pope as though the Pope is the voice of God. That's what happened in ancient history. And so this individual carries this tremendous amount of power that they're usurping from the authentic spirituality of the individual, and they're forming it into a belief system, a certain way you have to think about God, a certain way you have to think about yourself. These are all identity issues. And what a religion does is it builds inside a person what I call an identity crisis, because the religion is attempting to make it and its edicts, laws, and tenets the laws and tenets of the individual. And so the religion then controls what the person thinks of themselves and what they think of the world. What they know about the world and themselves is coming through the religion. And this is not appropriate. This is supposed to be natural and occurring in the person as they develop their spirituality, as they grow and begin to notice that there is actually a larger realm, a larger world, a larger realization that is far past what any religion could convey to anyone. And so I always consider religion to be a smaller version, a golf ball sized version of the spirituality, of the wonderment that is living life. And the religions have been corrupted because they want to come in, those institutions want to come in and control the society. And this is exactly why they're still battling in the Middle East. They're still warring. It's because the religion has kept these societies in a state of conflict. Religions organize people into realms of conflict. And so you have the in-group, and they are the ones who carry the eternal life, the eternal security, the correct God, the correct idea of what a person is. And then you have the out group. And that's the people that don't believe like those that are within the religion. And so that begins conflict. And what the organizers, what the KM is wanting to do is to put all of society into conflict. So we're all fighting each other. And we never realize that we're fighting each other because of the ideas that have been put in our head through religion. And religion is controlled by the fearmongers, by the controllers. And they don't want society cohesive and working and loving each other. They want the society hating each other, fighting and destroying each other. And so this is how the society is controlled, is oftentimes through religious ideas, which are abominations of the spirituality that you're born with naturally. Mm-hmm. And so religion has an entirely different, it has actually nothing to do with spirituality, but taking the ideas of spirituality and defining them finely and then handing those to the society. And that's not a good idea, because these things are to develop naturally as you go through the course of your life. And so religion has played an enormous part in controlling the society. I mean, if you look at America now, over 80% of it is Christian. That is a religion that has a hold of that society. And if all those people are following the Christian religion very tightly, they have no idea that there's actually a larger world that is far beyond the laws and orders that Christianity demands. And so this is how religion and spirituality are actually extremely different from one another. One is a controlling agency and one is a liberating agency. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I think as you sort of got to there, I think one is externalizing, again, authority and hierarchical power structures, whereas spirituality is talking about internal sovereignty and looking within. But with Christianity, do you think, or any religion, do you think there's still some good messages about how to live peacefully or whatever, as well as how it's now been more corrupted and seems to be getting worse? Do you think initially a lot of the messages maybe came from spirituality and shamanism or meditation or psychedelic use or whatever it was, and there were really good messages?
Absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Because what's wrong with loving God? What's wrong with loving your neighbor? What's wrong with showing kindness to others and sharing with them your light? I mean, there's nothing wrong with these fundamental ideas. And that's how you can always be able to capture someone, is that within the lies are some truths. And that's a great, because if something is nothing but lies, typically the average person can identify that, okay, that's false. But when it's intertwined with some good ideas and good messages, along with its capturing ideas, that's when it gets much more difficult to differentiate these things and what's good for you and what's not. But I don't think there's anything wrong with the idea of meditation like they teach in Buddhism, and finding your center, finding that voice that is your heart, that shows you the right and righteous way to live, which doesn't come from outside. As long as I'm seeking outside myself, I'm always in a state of anxiety because I'm not looking inward. I'm looking to something outside of me for guidance, which isn't a good idea, which is the purpose of meditation, is self-guidance, is realizing that you are much more than this body that you are contained in. You're a much larger being, much larger creature than what you see in the mirror. And things like meditation help you realize that by raising your vibration and realizing that I'm not a physical creature, I'm a vibration. I'm a much more in-depth and in tune with nature creature than I am some kind of religious idea or some type of egotistical idea. I'm much larger than that kind of a concept.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's helpful. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think it probably ties into, I want to talk about what else you've discovered in your research about the history of religions and how they were corrupted. Do you think all religions initially had just so many parallels, or were maybe just tweaked to fit different cultures? Or, yeah, what's your thoughts on how we got here?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, Christianity, Western religion, was formed out of ancient mythologies. None of it is original. It's just basically a recostuming and a reshaping of some really great fundamental principles, like one of them being from death comes life. I mean, this is a transcendent truth that really doesn't have anything to do with religion. It's actually spirituality, and realizing that when you die, you don't really die. When anything dies, it doesn't really die. It just changes its form. It just goes into another reality that is different, or not as relatable as this one is that we're talking in right now. And that deeper principle, that deeper sense, is really the key to most every kind of awakening. This understanding these truths is very important. And so what Christianity did in 325 is they took all of these metaphorical concepts and they packaged them into one group and said, okay, this is the truth. So they took pieces of paganism, they took pieces of Buddhism, they took pieces of these ancient Eastern ideas of spirituality, and they integrated it into one context, one book, one way, one God, one method, and said, here you go. And it's sort of an idea of a one size fits all. But if looking at it commonsensically, you'll know there's no way that spirituality would ever fit into a one size fits all. That doesn't happen. In the same way, if I'm a parent and I have multiple children, they're not going to be all the same. Each one is going to be actually completely different than the other. And spirituality and coming into awareness is much the same road. Each of us are going to have a different pathway that leads us to this higher thinking, this higher vibration. And the church simply came along and it wanted to say, no, we have the right narrative. This is the God. This is the way to think about yourself and what you are and what the world is. And this is confining. This is taking something that was supposed to be free and developing, and it's saying you can only know that by reading this book or by following this particular God that we tell you about. And that is completely inappropriate to the development of the individual. And why they did that, because it really does control the development of the individual, and they won't be able to develop out of this idea of maybe being a sinner or fallen from God or whatever, because they're going to be spending the rest of their life in atonement of that situation. And so you don't develop. And so that's why they captured religion, so that the entire society would be dumbed down to their ideas, to their God, to their concept, to their whole mapping of the human experience. And if you think about it, that's completely logical. If I was a malicious individual, that's exactly what I do, so that I don't have to keep capturing the person. They stay captured themselves. Once I give them a narrative, they never lead it. And so that's why religion was developed that way. That's why it came about, and they put all these institutions that predated Christianity and put pieces of them into Christianity, so to capture all the Romans because they were breaking up from the heresy that was coming out of the Far East. And you can't have a divided kingdom in Rome or anywhere that is divided in their spiritual notions, their religious notions. They all have to be aligned. And so that's why they did that. It wasn't to help the society, it was to get them all in cohesion so they wouldn't resist, so they wouldn't think for themselves, but would think how Rome at that time told them to think. Yeah. And so that is how you control the society so they don't ever think outside the box. And one great way to do that is religion.
Well, let's get into the dark side of some of religions as well. And this has become a lot more mainstream in the past few years. We've done episodes about how many missing children there are and the child trafficking stuff. Adrenochrome, Russell Brand covered Pizzagate the other day. So some of these biggest podcasts and channels are now starting to touch on this subject. But do you want to maybe talk about some of the, even how prevalent Satanism now is throughout Hollywood and the music industry and movies, and it's almost hiding in plain sight now, some of these, the evil forces that these people seem to worship. Do you want to dive into that and maybe, again, the history of all that?
Okay, well, this is really dark information. Now, okay, so we talked earlier about the Khazarians and how they basically made a living out of marauding and killing families and taking their money and so forth. Okay, that was their initiation. Okay, so as we continue down that road, those individuals, now think about this spiritually, as those groups have children and raise those children in that kind of environment, you are predispositioned in your understanding of the world to the way these Satanists, the way these sick people have taken over the world. And so they train this into the children. You can see this in George Soros's kid. George has put all of this evil and has trained his son into that evil, and he's now fully incorporated into it. And take that concept, go back a few thousand years, and think of the same way these Khazarians are raising their kids. They're raising them in the trade. They're raising them in the way of usurping and taking from people. Okay, now I say that to say this. This creates a massive void in the individual spiritually, because you're relating to the world. It's coming through evil. It's coming through the killing and murdering of others and taking from them. And this creates a tremendous void inside the individual, because we as human beings are centered in love. Yet this person is being raised with this idea of evil. This creates a massive void. And so to fill that void, they take children, which are the greatest example of God, because children are untainted. They have been uninfiltrated by the world. And so they're a completely innocent being, and they are filled with life and with light. And so by these families, these KM people, by torturing the child and by putting that child into pain and anguish, you then begin to suck out what is called loosh, which is the spiritual energy of that child. And these grotesque groups consider that, or the demons that surround them, consider that food. And so this energy, this electromagnetic energy, this innocent energy pours out of the child as they are being tortured. And this creates inside the child what is called adrenochrome. Adrenochrome happens through the oxidizing of adrenaline. And that happens when a person, a baby, is being tortured, and your body releases adrenochrome as a fight or flight to give you energy so that you can fight your way out of your situation. That's why that's happening physiologically. You are in a fight or flight mode. And so the adrenochrome is a pure form of energy that your blood, that your organs can utilize instantaneously for strength to be able to escape what is happening. So like in the old times, if you were being attacked by a wild animal or something, as you were going through that, adrenochrome is being released into your blood so that you have energy to fight this creature or whatever is attacking. This is a natural function of the human body. And so they are pilfering that out of the child. And by torturing the child over a period of about 20 minutes to an hour, the more pain you can put into the child, the more adrenochrome is developed, and the more of this loosh comes out of the child, which the evil spirits eat. And so eventually, what happens at the end of the ritual is the blood is drained out of the child that contains the adrenochrome. And then the priest and those that are engaging the ritual then drink that blood. Well, that blood is filled with oxidized adrenaline. And this has a hallucinogenic pleasure effect on the practitioner. So the torturer, the priest that's carrying this out, drinks this blood, and they are then filled with that energy that was in the child. It's induced into them through hallucinogenic experience and pleasure. It's about, from what I've read in reports and testimonies from people who talk about it, they say it's about 10 times the power of heroin. Heroin is about 10 times the power of morphine, which is about 5 times the power of opium. These are all opioids. And so what the priest is drinking is this incredibly life-giving, life-initiating, life-pleasure feeling. And you can imagine a priest in 325 who is initiating one of their acolytes, and they're seeing this happen, and then they drink the blood and they are filled with the same energy that the priest is. That acolyte is then going to be thinking, I am working with a God here because these feelings I'm having, this sense of pleasure I'm experiencing is godlike. And so that is the physiology, the hardcore mechanics that are behind what they're doing with the child torture. So it not only feeds the evil spirits, the louche, but it presents pleasure. It's anti-aging for the priest. That's why a lot of these people you see in Hollywood don't age. It's because they're drinking and partaking in this adrenochrome weekly, daily, whatever they have to do. And it has this effect on the physiology of the person that is very life-giving because they are taking the life out of the child that they're murdering. And it's a transfer of power and electromagnetics. And that technology goes all the way back, well past the formation of the church. This goes all the way back to the very, very ancient priests, like we talked about at the beginning of our talk here, that began to be filled with greed and taking over and usurping the power and wanting to keep the power from the society. And so before the Khazarian Mafia was organizing with this technology, it was seated deep, deep, deep down within these societies secretively. It had not formally organized. This was the Satanism that was carrying through the ancient tribal people that are coming out of the Canaanites. And so it's a truly secret society. This was secret information. I mean, no one would know this. You would only know this if you were initiated by a priest class. This isn't common knowledge that the everyday person in the masses is going to find out about, like how you can do this to a child to get this energy out of them and to feed these evil spirits. And that was another reason why they did it, is because then they become into relationship with evil spirits. And they are conjuring and fomenting this evil, and then they are making deals by providing this child and their soul to these demonic evil entities. They are now in agreement with, and those entities will empower the priests to be able to cast spells and to take over the society with a third dimensional power, fourth dimensional power. And so that's the science and undergirding of what is really going on with the adrenochrome and why they're doing it and how they use it to then blackmail other families through threat of doing that to their children, and then also performing that upon people that surround the families. And you can control a family when you put something like that in front of them and tell them, we're going to do the same thing to you and your kids if you don't obey us. And so this is how governments are taken over. This is how royal societies are taken over. So that's a little bit. Does that help? Does that answer?
Yeah, no, that's a deep dive. And again, for a lot of this, I know this is dark stuff and hard for people to swallow, but a lot of people are pretty familiar with, human sacrifice in ancient times. And then we hear all these stories throughout, the Middle Ages. And then we see all this artwork, even as recently as a couple of hundred years ago. And then more recently with the Pizzagate stuff coming out, the modern artwork in the house of people like, the Soroses or the Epsteins of the world or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to throw this in, but isn't it interesting that Christianity constellates human sacrifice? I mean, it's a human sacrifice at the center of the religion. I mean, that's how these people think they are freed of sin, is through human sacrifice. And isn't it interesting that it's human sacrifice that's at the center of the KM? And when you begin to notice these kind of very dark patterns at the basic of things, That is why it's so difficult for people to walk into that world, because it really causes there to be an identity factor that is really horrific. And when people start to realize that what they're involved with is involved with this heinous activity, that's very convicting. And that's why some of these rabbit holes are so difficult to go down, because they really point back to the individual and their own ontology, their own belief system that they have integrated. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a parallel.
Yeah. And I think as well, when I was going down these rabbit holes, as you realize this evil is so real, it makes you want to believe that the opposite can be true, in terms of the good and spirituality and all those
Right.
positive things as well. But maybe let's get into some of the other arm of control, like pillar of control, the military stuff. And as we're recording this, it's kind of, Israel, Iran's really heating up and retaliating against each other. Israel is really a key to all this and connects back to the KM, as you've covered. For those that don't know, Israel was, founded by the Rothschilds after World War II. And if you dive deep into
Yes.
wars, it almost looks like that's what both the wars were for. So do you want to talk about everything you've found there and this push, this long operation to seem to drag the world into World War III?
Yeah, well, Israel was formed to be the controlling center. I mean, they really have been controlling behind the scenes, basically everything. And this is the KM. This is the hub of the KM. And the whole thing, like you said, is a false notion. They were formed just after the war, and the whole reason, I agree with you, if that's what you said, that the reason for the war was to begin to form this Israeli state and to push out the Palestinians further and further away from their homeland. And so this is true evil. This is really how they operate. And the military, I mean, the United States has become the military arm of the KM. And this all goes back to the banking system when they took over the United States money. And because you have to have money to take over governments. And so the whole reason they went off the gold standard in America wasn't for the betterment of people in business. It was to take total control of the money. And then they were able to then buy out and to start to build their own military. And that's really what then blossomed with the CIA in 1947 when it was formed, 47, 48. That was to be the center agency that would control all the military activity of this incredible superpower called the United States government. And that's why they killed JFK, because JFK was going to expose all of this. He was going to show that this group had taken over. And that group, I mean, the CIA is their functioning arm. That's the military functioning arm of the KM. It has nothing to do with the betterment or the safety of the American people. And this CIA, I mean, one of my videos in the three of my videos of the God Eaters, part 3A, B, and C, I completely elucidate how this whole thing came about. I think in part 3, A, B, C, part 3C, I lay out how they took over the CIA. How, I mean, the story is so long I could never memorize it, but I lay out how all of that was done behind the scenes underneath the idea of the CIA as helping people all through the 40s, or excuse me, the 50s and the 60s, that they're there trying to stop war, whereas they're the ones who built the Cold War. They're the ones that caused the Cold War. That's a product of the CIA. That was a function of the CIA. The entire MK Ultra world in brainwashing not only individuals but entire nations. That's CIA. And all of that brainwashing technology all comes out of psychological institutions in Germany. And I lay all that out also in my God Eaters. And I show that the entire Second World War was, again, it was two sides were the same body. The KM was both one side and the other in the war, in World War I and World War II. And the war was simply done to establish and put into place their people, their laws, their ways, to further take away the sovereignty and rights of the people. And what we're seeing right now, I mean, you're seeing with all of the illegal immigration that they're putting into these cities. This is organized. It's not random. It's not happenstance. They are purposefully doing that. And it's to alienate and bring about dysfunction in these very powerful growing societies. And they just fill them with an entire populace that's going to dilute away all of the people that have been there for generations and generations and generations, establishing and fundamentally empowering that country. And so military is essential to controlling entire nations, and the CIA is the greatest example of how you use military to not only take over a country, but to literally take over the whole world. And what we're seeing right now in Israel and Iran and all the war that's happening, this is the result of the CIA's workings. They basically have taken an ancient anger situation that came out of Abraham and Esau and Isaac and that whole story, and they've just kept that mother trucker going all the way down into the modern age. And then the KM doing that formed the CIA to continue that. And so the CIA has never been about stopping that war, keeping that from happening. And I think what we're seeing right now with what's happening with the Trump administration is they're coming in and they're not trying to continue this. They're allowing this situation to play out, in my opinion, and they're allowing these two countries to render their true intention, to render that they're controlled by a mafia, that this is not the betterment of the people happening here. This is a mafia fighting. This doesn't have anything to do with the betterment of people, society, freeing these people. What you're seeing is the playing out of the mafias, and that's the war as it's going on. Now, I don't know exactly what the plan is. I don't even, honestly, I don't even know if the Trump administration is involved with the malicious nature. I don't think we as a society have enough information to truly answer that question. But I can say, this is the part that gives me hope. There's a reason we know what we know. There has been an unfolding, a purposed unfolding that has been happening worldwide. The reason why I made my God Eater videos, the substance that is in those videos, that was information that was simply not available before the internet. And the internet, in my opinion, is being used to connect the groundwork people like you and me that are in the trenches living life to discover, hey, wait a minute, this costume that I see of the government, that's not real. They're actually quite evil. But we know that because we have been allowed to know that. So it's in my opinion that there actually is a plan underway that is trying to organically allow people to become aware. And those that want to know can know. And they can go onto the internet and inform and empower themselves so that they can be a part of this movement of awareness that I call the Great Awakening. And that's our responsibility as individuals, is to take it upon ourselves, the self-responsible action of finding out what's really going on and looking past the facade that the media, that the military, that religion has placed on the world. And this is our role, and that's what we're doing right now, Alex, is you and I in this moment are beginning to shine a light into something that is so dark it's almost impossible for people to see. And the only reason you and I, Alex, are empowered to do that is because we now have found out. We've looked behind the curtain. We have found out the magician's trick. And when you find out the magician's trick, that magician can't trick you anymore. And the last thing the KM want anyone doing is seeing past the war that's happening, seeing past the government as it presents itself, seeing past the CIA as it presents itself. And the only way we can do that is by each one of us going into the trenches and finding out for ourselves what is really going on. And that is really the empowering emphasis that's going on right now. I can't make full sense of the war. I can't make full sense of the Trump administration or Biden and all that stuff. I can't make full sense of it, but I can use my head and discern, hey, there's a reason I know what I know, and I wouldn't know what I know if the bad guys, quote unquote, were still in control. Because it's of my opinion that the Great Awakening is a process of moving from this dark, soylent green world that we live in into this awakened reality whereby the people no longer allow themselves to be controlled because they have been self-empowered through wisdom. That's the point of baptism. Baptizing the mind with wisdom so that it is no longer in a state of reactivity and sympathetic. It is now proactive and self-empowered so that then it knows, meaning you and me, can know the fact or the gold from the garbage. We can differentiate truth from fiction, and that happens through self-empowerment. And so I really think personally, Alex, that we really are on a very long, multi-decade unfolding of this, because that's the only way you would be able to awaken a society is through first crawling and then walking and then learning to run. You can't run first step. We all have to crawl first. And that's the hard work. That's going into the rabbit hole. That's crawling underneath the surface and discovering for yourself the light that is available to you. But you're going to have to crawl first, and then you'll learn to walk, and then you'll learn to run. And that's the same way your mind learns. And so that's what's going, in my opinion, that's the bigger picture of what's happening here. We are in the midst of a great awakening. That's what I think.
I really hope you're right, Chuck, because it certainly feels like one of the hardest things about waking up is realizing that, you know, everyone around you and the people you love are kind of not awake, and then you try to awake a lot of people, and as you say, people have to wake up through their own process. No matter how many times you tell someone something, they won't believe you. And that gets into what you were saying about the CIA and all the Nazi scientists that were already experimenting with mind control. And when people hear about MKUltra mind control, they think maybe, you know, underground lab tests and acid experiments. But what's really been rolled out now is very professional programming through media and through, you know, smartphones and social media now, and these addictions to program people. And so, as you say, I feel like if that theory is right, it's going to have to get very bad. Just like COVID probably woke up more people than ever, even though it was horrific what they did. As you say, if we end up getting this war going on, and now maybe Palantir, I'm really hoping that they are maybe showing people how bad it's going to get, or even if the bad guys are still planning on rolling out these things, and it is going to get bad, that is still hopefully going to wake enough people up, because there's no doubt, like you said, that the systems of control and this AI surveillance and stuff, it's really worrying, and people are now, you can almost show someone something, but they don't even know if it's real or not because of how real AI has gotten. That's my kind of worry, that people are just not even going to be able to decide what's real or what's not as it gets worse. But what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, and I liked it. I should have brought this up when you mentioned the behind-the-scenes stuff in CIA, and that a really good way a person can know what you're talking about is real and that we've been in an illusion. The whole point of World War II was that Project Paperclip, or one of the major reasons was that Project Paperclip, and bringing all of this science and knowledge of torturing people and finding out how to control them through torture. All these Nazi scientists that had been spending the entire Holocaust doing that, they brought that information to America. They were placed, I mean, NASA became the major propaganda institution because it was started by a Nazi. And so this is a propaganda institution. It's not there to show you the truth. It'll show you 20%, 10% of the truth, but the vast majority isn't. And so that is why they do things like that, so that they can put into place their people that will then mind control the world. And so it just keeps unfolding, like you have been saying, in that you, once you have established that authority, you then can control the people. And then what was your question, your follow-up question that I wanted to augment it with that World War II, but what was that major thing you wanted me to go into?
You've lost me now. It was more just about the mind control and how well they've done it now through smart devices and stuff.
Yeah, okay. So all of that, so here's a great example. So the CIA found out in the 70s that the blue screens that they used in casinos put people into a trance. It put their mind into a state. It had a vibration that caused a disruption in the thinking processes of the person who's gambling, who's pulling the slot machine. And that blue screen put them into a trance, and they basically took that concept of like, wow, we can put someone into a trance just by watching television. Well, that's why television went color, and it began to grow. It wasn't to entertain the people, it was to control the people. And it's through these kind of fundamental activities that they go about doing their deeds. And people had no idea what is happening and how it is happening. And it's really happening right through. I mean, and we talked about it earlier with the drugs. Look at the petrochemical drugs they put people on. These dilute people. These take your discernment and throw it in the garbage because you're so out of it from being on all of these opioids, and you're so addicted to them that you can't think straight any more than an alcoholic can think straight. It's the same function. And this is how you can see it's very organized. And that's another reason why you can know that there can be hope, is that we would not know any of this if they were still in control. Alex, there is no way we would have the information we have about what is really going on if they really were still in control. I mean, think about life in the 70s and 80s. Nobody knew this, but yet they were running the whole world. And you have to ask yourself, why did that stop? I mean, if everybody's completely in an illusion and just the top 1/2 of 1% know and run everything, What on earth would cause a crack in that idea? Like, how would you break through that kind of system? And that's why I think there's an undergirding principle of light behind this. And you're right, Alex. It's going to have to get darker and darker because there are still many people. I mean, the vast majority have no idea. And it's of my opinion, and this is as dark as this is, it's of my opinion that the whole reason COVID and the vaccines and all that came about was a culling, was to cull out the people that refuse to learn, the ones that are just obedient, do as their doctor tells them, and never think for themselves. You cannot expand that society if the vast majority of them think like that. They have to be called out. They have to they have to go into the natural, what is it, the Darwin Awards. They have to just basically submit themselves to that because they're not willing to do the work to awaken. They're not willing to question their authorities. They're not willing to self-empower. They want someone else outside of themselves providing for them, giving them the answers, handing them the deal, because they don't want to do the work themselves. Well, those people will never grow. They'll never grow, and they will stay in that low frequency, and they won't change. Well, you can't have an awakened society filled with people like that. And so the whole COVID and vaccine thing has basically self-eliminated these people. I mean, because they just simply haven't done the work, they went and submitted themselves. And it's like, well, you get what you deserve in this world, and nature is merciless. And there's no way you're going to be able to function in a great awakened society if you're still asking permission, seeking approval, and expecting reproof. Those are the activities and mindsets of a slave. And you have to, those people will never grow. And so I think, again, this to see the light in this, I think there was real purpose and still is purpose behind COVID, behind the vaccines, because basically these people are self-eliminating. They're just taking themselves out of the picture simply by not being smart enough, wise enough to take their life into their own hands and realize, my friend, you are being lied to. And if you don't waken, you deserve to continue to be lied to because we get what we deserve, you know? And so that's kind of the hard drill instructor logic behind what's happening. It's like, well, man, if you're not going to awaken, brother, then you're going to die. They're going to take advantage of you and you're going to die. And you have to do your role. That's what you and I are doing now, Alex. You and I are doing the work of attempting to shine light so that these people who are totally asleep, maybe some of them awaken and realize, holy smokes, I'm being lied to. And that's our role. That's what the light bringers are doing. You and me and others just like us are doing, is we are shining a light to hopefully awaken some of these people that have basically given their brain away to the society.
Yeah, and I want to end on a positive note, and as well, not scare people, because Australia had some of the strictest mandates in the world. So we've covered some of the protocols you can do to remove spike protein from your body, and I think it's ultimately an attack on your immune system and whatever. So maybe in the future episode we'll do a deeper dive, because there's, again, even if everything you just said is true, that itself for people going down the rabbit hole and forcing to awaken about how to look after their immune system and get through this if it has damaged them is going to be their awakening process. So do you want to maybe talk about some, end on a positive note of breaking free of the system? Because I agree, more people are waking up than ever. And maybe we'll do a follow-up and deep dive all about health and that stuff as well.
Absolutely. We are nature creatures. And so the powers that are in nature, the powers that are in the metaphysics, are powers that within us. And so one of the first things people have to do is realize you can detoxify, you can get rid of the chemicals and the toxins and poisons that are in your liver, that are in your body. You can do that. And there are means, ways, and methods that you can go about to heal. Absolutely. And I mean, really, folks, the great awakening for me began with death, began with cancer. I contracted cancer, and that was critical to my awakening. And so many people do have to get sick. They do have to have their life on the line before they snap out of it. And the good news is, if you snap out of it in time, you can detox, you can perform therapies, you can take natural medicines and plant essential oils and coffee enemas that will detox and remove from you the metals and the petrochemicals that you have been poisoned with. And even those of us that don't take pharma, just the air outside that you're breathing, just the food that you're eating poisons you. And by awakening yourself and realizing, hey, I'm not going to eat that processed food. I'm going to start a garden. I'm going to start growing my own food. I'm going to start eating healthy, eating organic. These are choices you can make starting right now at this moment that will begin to change and heal you. And the only way your brain is going to awaken is if you begin to remove the toxins that are causing it to be cloudy. And that requires coffee enemas, that requires plant essential oils, that requires meditation and silencing yourself so that you can begin to think clearly, you see. And so, yes, there is every reason for hope. And many people can use their dire situation of maybe having gotten a vaccine or gotten COVID or are sick or whatever. They can use that as an inspiration to heal and to realize, I am an impossibly powerful individual as a nature creature. And those powers that nature has given us to detox are available to every single one of us. And there are many detox functions you can do that don't cost extra money. Just simply making better food choices. Just simply getting up in the morning and going for a run or going for a run and eating. That's free. You can do that without spending a dime. A coffee enema costs about 10 cents and it does miraculous detoxifying to your liver. And it's the liver that is so poisoned in many of us. The liver often causes much of our body pain, much of our clouded mind, depression. This is all coming out of the pharmacology and chemistry of your liver, which is your chemical olfactory. And so if you clean that liver, you are cleaning the way you think. You are cleaning the way that your mind works, and you are awakening yourself. You're clearing out your skin. Your ability to see becomes clearer. You will hear better because your neurology will improve because you're improving your filter, which is your liver. You see? And so this kind of activity and awareness is a great way to gather hope in the midst of our very dark situation, and just simply realizing the nature creature that you are and realizing the empowerment therefore that you have because you come out of nature with all the power that it carries. So that's a great way to see this as a more positive light.
Yes. That's a great way to finish, Chuck. I will put all the links to follow Chuck and all his socials down below. I hope we come back on. We'll do a full health-related one, and I'll put on my pharmacist hat and talk all things natural as well. But any final thoughts for people at home?
I would love that. I would love to do that with you, Alex, especially because you're a former pharmacologist. And so I would love to pick your brain. One of the things that I did when I had cancer was when I talked to my holistic practicing doctor, and I sat across the table from her for an hour every week, and I just berated her with questions about pharma, about petromedicine, how it poisons the body, how it goes about what they're doing, how medical doctors have not been trained in holistic medicine. They have no idea about nutrition, and just informing myself. And so I would love to pick your brain sometime, Alex, to talk about that, because it's very important for people to realize that the petrochemical system is not their friend. And so absolutely, let's get together and have a discussion about that, because I would love to help people understand how they can detox and heal themselves. Take their own power, their own initiation, and heal themselves, not have to ask anybody outside them for permission, but actually take on the healing process they themselves. And it's very empowering. So yeah, dude, it would be awesome if we could get together and do that. I would love to do that. Awesome.
Perfect. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Smash that like button, give Chuck a follow on all his socials, and we'll catch up again soon, Chuck. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Alex. We'll see you.